native speakers of a language are not good teachers. Input is all that matters if you are a child immersed in a language-speaking environment.
Hey guys, Louis here, and today I have a very special video with Dr. Batia Laufer, who is the equivalent of a superstar in the world of language learning research. Every person in this field knows about Dr. Batia Laufer, and I got the chance of asking her questions extensively about language learning misconceptions, input versus instruction, effective strategies for language learning. I mean, a bunch of things. And so you're going to love this. There are tons of practical takeaways. And by the way, I'm going to put all of the takeaways from this interview on my website. If you don't have time to listen to everything, then just go to my website, louistalleyrand.com. I'm going to put the link in the description, and I hope that you enjoy this interview.
All right, guys, Louis here, and today I have a very special guest and a famous one in the field of language learning and vocabulary. So, Batia, I'll let you introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners.
I'm Batia Laufer from the University of Haifa in Israel. I did my PhD in applied linguistics in vocabulary acquisition when it was very unpopular, and moved to teaching applied linguistics. And I've been doing research in applied linguistics, mainly vocabulary, but I love grammar. Don't make the mistake. Supervising research, giving lectures, etc. I'm officially retired now from the university, but I continue supervising and doing research pro bono.
Yeah, it seems like a common pattern with academics. Even after they retire, they seem to be doing a lot of work. When I talked with Paul Nation, it seemed to be pretty much a pattern. I tried to get hold of Stephen Krashen, but he replied just, "I'm too busy right now and can't do this." So I suppose he's doing the same thing as well. Just to add a little bit to your profile here for the people watching us, probably most people don't realize how prolific you've been. I'm not an academic, but I'm aware that there is a measure in academia called H-index, and it's not necessarily, my understanding is that it's not necessarily a very good measure of how good you are as a researcher, but still it's somewhat of a measure, and you're at about 68, I think. I checked this morning. And this is like superstar level of, research and just citations. So just to put things into perspective. All right. Now, I'd like to start maybe a little bit broad with general questions, and then we can dive into more specific topics. So keeping in mind that people listening to this are just average people trying to learn languages, what would you say is one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about language learning?
Well, there are several misconceptions. One of them is that children and adults learn in the same way, and that's a misconception. For example, people say, "Oh, all you have to do is to listen to the language, and then you'll pick it up." No, it doesn't happen like that with adults. Another misconception, which I really don't like, is that teaching doesn't help. Grammar doesn't help. You have to use the language. Okay, you have to use the language, but that's not the only thing. You can't use something you really don't know. So these are some of the misconceptions. I think these are the main misconceptions. Because if you ask me how people learn languages, the short answer is, well, it depends. Depends on what? Whether you're an adult or a child, whether you are immersed in the language speaking environment, or whether you learn it in a classroom. And then you learn differently. And to think that, well, teaching doesn't help. All you have to do is listen to the TV. I think this is one of misconceptions of students as well, by the way. In one of my latest studies, we interviewed a bunch of students, how they think about out of school learning and in school learning, and they say, "Oh, well, my English is only from digital activities and not from school." And then when we tested them, actually, those who were better in school were also better in out of school learning. So people don't appreciate formal instruction.
Yeah, this has definitely been my experience as well. learning English in school, I think I studied English for about, I would say, 7 years in school, just like every French person, essentially. And I would say that in the beginning, I was not really good, but it set a good foundation for my, later studying. But there are 2 points here that I want to talk more about. So you mentioned that language learning is not necessarily the same for children and adults. But first of all, I want to talk about this idea, which seems to be extremely popular nowadays. And it's the idea that input is necessary, but it's also sufficient. This is the only thing that you need. The reason why I'm saying this is popular is because I uploaded an interview about 3 weeks ago with Dr. Jeff McQuillan. And he's all about input, and he's extremely popular on the internet. So I want to get your opinion on that. It seems that some people are saying this is all that matters. So Dr. Jeff McQuillan, I imagine Stephen Krashen. And then there are other people who say, well, it's useful, but this is not the only thing that matters. What do you think about this?
Well, in Israel, I always say that this country is a kind of for language learning. We have a lot of immigration, and you can observe a family of immigrants where a child picks up the language in 3 months, and the adults struggle and his adult parents struggle for years. So input is all that matters if you are a child immersed in a language-speaking environment. Then this is okay. But if you're an adult, even if you're immersed in English in a language-speaking environment, it's not enough. And people say that. I always tell them, look, if I find myself in a remote Chinese village where nobody speaks any language I know except Chinese, I will be lost, even if they talk to me and talk to me and talk to me. Because children have this ability of processing input and understanding, but adults have much less, and some don't possess it at all. By the way, I learned 11 languages, so I think I also relate to my own experience. Adults need what you call method in the madness. They need to systematize the input. They need to analyze it sometimes. I think there's a lot of research that shows that adults who had good instruction learn the language much faster and better than those who struggled through the input and figuring out what things mean.
Yeah. I just want to play the devil's advocate here, because I know I can see this coming from miles away. There are people who are going to leave comments on this video saying, no, I don't agree. Input is all that you need and all of this. But so the argument I would say is that when I talked with Dr. Jeff McQuillan, he said that, and I would say that probably Stephen Krashen would say the same thing, is that when you do sort of deliberate learning activities, like, for example, studying with flashcards, studying word lists and stuff like that, then there's a clear difference between this type of learning and actual language acquisition. These two things are separate things. What do you think about this?
Well, first of all, I think that people who oppose instruction do not distinguish between what in the past was called grammar translation method and what is grammar for use. I'll give you an example. And I think I heard it in one of your interviews. Somebody gave an example. For example, if you change sentences from active to passive, Bill kicked the ball was kicked by the Bill. This is useless because nobody speaks like that. But if you teach passive via what happened to your car? Oh, it was stolen. What happened to your request? They say it will be taken care of, you see? That's where passive is used. So once upon a time, people taught Latin, and they taught it via those automatic exercises and via translation. That doesn't mean that translation or grammar teaching is not good. You have to know how to do it. And the fact that there are kind of two separate abilities is also nowadays, I think it was shown that explicit knowledge can become implicit knowledge. I think Paul Nation mentioned this. Actually, there is a whole notion of skill automatization, which means that even if you know first how to do something slowly, that is, you think, should I use the present perfect or should I use past here? This is kind of slow process, what Krashen would say learning, which doesn't help. You do it many times, in time it becomes automatic and you stop thinking. That's where instruction comes in. And if you have a good teacher knows exactly what kind of exercises you need in order to make this explicit learning, try and make it implicit. So that's why I don't believe in this distinction between acquisition and learning. Maybe it's true for children, and again, they just pick up the language from input. That's it, but not for adults.
Right. You mentioned earlier that you learned 11 languages, I think. Which languages are these?
Well, first of all, let me say, I went through the process of learning. I lost a lot of them or they deteriorated. You see, I'm a person who has no mother tongue. Started with Russian because I was born in Lithuania, Soviet Union, and went to a Russian-speaking school. At the age of 10, we moved to Poland, where I went to Polish school, so I switched to Polish. And at the age of 13, we immigrated to Israel. So Hebrew, which is nowadays my dominant language and my best language, is actually my fourth language, because in the meantime, I also picked up some Yiddish from my grandparents, just from the input. So my best language, dominant language, is Hebrew nowadays, but I started learning it at the age of 13, which is kind of a critical period between childhood and adulthood. So if you ask a linguist, they say, well, you have no mother tongue in the traditional sense, but I have the dominant language, which is Hebrew. And then I learned English, French, and Spanish, and Dutch. What else? Arabic, Latin.
I see. So let's assume, for example, that you have to learn a new language and you already have so many languages. Let's say something new that I haven't heard of. Oh, like an Asian language, for example. This would be new. Like Japanese, for example. Let's put aside the whole problem of the writing system, because I think this is a bit of a different issue. Let's assume that you're just going to learn the language with the objective to really have conversations with people. And let's assume that you have about a year to reach as high of a level as possible. But this is your full-time job. You don't need to worry about cooking, and everything is provided to you. How would you go about doing this?
Well, first of all, I would try to get a good teacher because I believe in instruction. I don't think I would do it on my own, particularly because, only from cassettes, from listening, no. I would get myself a good teacher. And why do I need a good teacher? First of all, to have an interlocutor, because I don't think that talking to a computer is great fun. Then I would also ask this teacher, since I am an experienced language learner, I would tell him or her that I heard that Japanese has a lot of loan words from English. Of course, they sound a bit different. They went through an adaptation to the Japanese system. But I would want a whole list of loan words. Sometimes they're called cognates if the languages are historically related, but loan words such as English and French have plenty of loan words. Liberté and liberty and all of these tion, which becomes sion, right? Now, that would give me already a lot of vocabulary. And sometimes teachers don't realize that if they give learners list of loan words, they would immediately boost vocabulary size very easily. This is why related languages like German, English, or English and French, or French and Spanish and Italian are so easier, much easier to learn than, let's say, Japanese or Chinese. First of all, but in Japanese, I heard that there are plenty of English loanwords. So I would like these just to make my life easier. Then I would like to tell me, but again, because I'm an experienced language learner, not a person who is a non-language, not a linguist, I would like to tell me just the basics of the system. For example, do I have to inflect verbs? Do I have to, what is the word order? And then we would start building short sentences. So loan words, which would boost my vocabulary easily. Then for vocabulary, most frequent words like go, take, like, eat, etc. And then basic structure. And then we'd start building short sentences, talking, building long sentences, elaboration, together with vocabulary expansion. So it would be kind of balanced. It has to be balanced. It's not all vocabulary, right? Because otherwise we would learn dictionaries by heart. So most frequent vocabulary, the easiest vocabulary for me to boost my vocabulary size, basic structures, and we would start practicing. And practicing also kind of balancing conversation without correction, so to work on fluency, and balancing, exercising, a kind of conscious exercising. Okay, now we are going to talk about past events. Okay, let's do the verbs in past tense. Okay, let's now change from future. Let's do future. So focused, language focused, as Paul Nation says, language focused, meaning focused, input and output. What I call a healthy mix of everything.
Right. And so
This is true.
you mentioned it seems like if you were to do it on your own, you would still make extensive use of a teacher. Uh, and you said that this is mainly because it makes things more interesting. Is that the reason?
And makes it easier, makes it quicker. By the way, if you asked me how would I learn Italian, let's say, I think I could do it on my own. I think I could do it on my own because it is so related to, let's say, French, and I know some French. I think because I even trying, I was in Italy some time ago, I was trying to read stuff, listen to people, and I could figure out a lot of things. So that is different because somehow I already have some of the background from other languages. And this is another misconception. You asked me about misconceptions at the beginning, saying, well, your first language has no influence on the new language. That's not true. It has an influence. It has negative and positive influence. Because why can I figure out so much in Italian? Because I learned French and some Spanish. So that's influence. That's a very positive influence. This is another thing about teaching. Maybe some people will not like it. I think that very often native speakers of a language who do not know the native language of their students are not good teachers because they do not understand what their students' specific problems
Right.
are.
Hey guys, Lois here, and just a very quick interruption and then we'll go back to the interview. If you have benefited in any way from any of my interviews or any of my videos, I really want to ask you for a favor, which is please subscribe to my YouTube channel or to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. The reason why I'm saying this, and I know that a lot of YouTubers and a lot of creators, they always say this, but for me, this is extremely useful because when I contact guests, researchers in the field of language learning, it is really helpful for me to have more subscribers because then they see that I have a lot of reach and they're much more likely to come and talk to me. So if you want to give back to me for, the interviews that I have done in a way that is completely free for you, please just click on the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, back to the interview.
Yeah, this is a good point. I just want to go back on my own experience, actually. remember when I was in college, I went to college in Switzerland, in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. And after my first, my freshman year, I had, summer break about 3 months. It was excessively long. So I thought, I might as well just do something useful. And this is when my language learning journey, I suppose, started. I thought, well, you know what? In Switzerland, where I lived, there were a lot of Italian speakers. So I'm going to learn Italian. It seems easy enough considering that I'm a French speaker. And so I started doing this. And I don't, looking back, I think a lot of the things that I did were not necessarily ideal, but nevertheless, in about 10 months, I was able to have conversations with Italian speakers. And now, obviously, looking back, I realized that a lot of this had to do with the fact that I'm a French speaker, and it's really a lot easier than it would be for an Asian person, for example. But um, yeah, and I tried doing the same thing. The next language that I took on was Japanese. And so in my mind, I thought, you know what? I learned Italian in about 10 months. Well, Japanese, it's a little bit harder, but let's say a year. That's going to be fine. And obviously, I'm still learning Japanese after many years now. So we all know how this
Yeah.
turned out. But so my question here is, uh, let's say for an English speaker, which is the case of, most people listening to this, how long should they expect the language learning to take for them to really reach a solid conversational level?
I have no idea. I can't tell you, and I don't think that anybody who gives you a time limit has evidence for that, because there are plenty of individual differences if we're talking about adults. And of course, well, it will also depend whether you are together in a group of other learners in the language speaking country, or you're doing it at your own desk. Again, individual differences here are very important. Some people have a better ability to learn languages. Some people don't. Some people have better memory to memorize words, to memorize structures. Others don't. Some people have a very good ear. They pick up the pronunciation. Some don't. Well, see, I don't sound like a native speaker in English. I tried, couldn't. So I don't think there is an answer to that. Again, it depends on individual abilities, on your motivation, on the amount of time you're going to invest. I don't know. Maybe people know, but I don't know any evidence that showed you so many hours you need. I think there are some guidelines from the Sefer people in Europe in terms of thousands of hours, but that's how how many hours kids need informal instruction. For that, we have guidelines
Right. Yeah.
for example, in order to reach B2 level, our new curriculum uh, suggests starting in the 4th grade and finishing in the 12th grade with the average about 4 hours a week. That's a lot, a lot.
Yeah, it's such a hard question. It depends on so many individual factors, plus obviously your native language and the language being learned. I want to talk more about vocabulary because my experience, since starting Japanese has been that, the grammar is somewhat manageable. There's a somewhat
Yeah.
limited amount of content that I need to learn, and then, that's it. I've learned it all. But then vocabulary just seems like this endless mountain of words that I need to learn. And I'm talking here specifically if I want to be at a high level where I'm able to watch the news in Japanese, but I'm also able to talk about science. I'm also able to watch, TV shows in Japanese. I'm really able to do pretty much everything at a high level. Then this is really, really hard. Would you agree that vocabulary is the main obstacle for language learners?
Definitely, definitely. And as you said, grammar is manageable because by definition, what is grammar? It's a system of a limited number of rules. You know a rule. You will know a rule X. You can create an infinite number of sentences with this particular rule. That's the definition of language. But with vocabulary, come on, there are thousands and thousands of words. Of course, I do not know of a research for Japanese vocabulary, but we know that for English, if you want to do what you want to do, to listen to lectures and discuss, you would need about 8,000 word families, probably active knowledge if you want to use them and to discuss academic topics.
Right. And 8,000 is just a huge number. And you talked about word families. So we're not talking about single words. It's really word families, which is even more difficult. So since vocabulary is such a big challenge, could you recommend some strategies? And I'm thinking specifically of people who are learning on their own, not with a teacher, not with a school. What are some good vocabulary learning strategies?
Well, magic word is recycling. Of course, people are learning on their own. I don't think they reach 8,000, knowledge of 8,000 words. That would be very good. That'd be quite exceptional if they learn on their own from the very beginning. Can you recycle 8,000 words, you see? It's rather impossible. But for beginners, I think up to 2, 3 first 1,000 words, you need to recycle. And recycle in various ways. That is, it's not just here is a word, what does it mean in my language? That's okay, but you need to see in different contexts to enrich the knowledge of the use. Unless it's a very simple word. If it's a word like cat, you don't need to see it in different contexts. But you really see an abstract word and a word that takes different collocations and has certain grammatical characteristics, such as followed by a certain preposition like depend on, depend in. You need to see it in different contexts.
So
And you need
just to clarify very quickly, by recycling, you mean getting multiple repetitions of the same word, right? Oh.
in different ways, not just from input and also from your own practice.
Right.
And here again, a good teacher would come, because if I were to teach you certain vocabulary, I would elicit these words in different contexts so that I make sure you practice them in various ways. If you're doing it on your own without the appropriate materials, and here is another problem, teaching materials. This is a problem. You may not do what you should be doing, but still you will be recycling. You'll be seeing the word in different amount of times.
Right. Yeah. This is pretty much when I read a lot of material from Paul Nation, and apparently recycling or repetition is a crucial aspect of vocabulary. I just want to get your opinion on something that I have done, because recently I have been building flashcards for different languages. The website is ankicordex.com. I'll put the link in the description for people who are interested. But essentially, the concept is that flashcards apparently are very effective. That's my experience. We talked about it with Paul Nation. And people need to learn a lot of words. So what I've done is that I took a bunch of sentences from Corpora, from a university in Germany, and I analyzed, lemmatized it all, and ordered it by frequency. And so I have multiple languages now where I have decks of about 10,000 flashcards, the 10,000 most common words, which is a lot. I realize that most people are not going to get through the whole thing, but the difference between these decks and the other flashcard decks is that there's a word, there's an example sentence to put it in context. There's audio as well, which is generated using artificial intelligence, which is quite good nowadays. And I've also added a mnemonic, so it's using the keyword method or the keyword technique to enhance memory of this thing. And then there's a word part analysis for some words to break down the word into different parts. And this is all using the piece of software called Anki. I don't know if you're aware of it. But so I just want to get your expert opinion on, do you think that this is a good way to go about learning vocabulary, and how would you improve these flashcard decks?
Well, first of all, I believe in flashcards. Some people don't. I do, because I believe in explicit learning. By the way, before there were flashcards, people like me, we were making vocabulary lists with foreign language on one side, native explanation or translation, and we would put our hand on one side and we would practice vocabulary. That was the most primitive way of doing this. Of course, flashcard is the modern development of this, actually the same principle. You see the word on one side and you try to remember what is on the other side of the flashcard. Okay. So in principle, I'm all for it. Again, as you said, 8 or 10,000 words, I don't think that people will do it unless they are kind of language learning freaks, which is fine. But the principle is fine. And the principle is that actually what you're doing, you're offering options like word parts. Some people don't care, especially at the beginning. Why do you care? Personally, I think it's important because that gives you an awareness of word structure and word family. And then when you see a word with a similar structure, like a unbelievable, you will know, there is a believe, there is and there is able. So it is important to develop awareness of word structure. So I'm all for it. I like the idea, and I think there is also research that shows that this works. So all those people who think that teaching doesn't matter, just input. I don't think they've read this.
Right. Yeah, and I also want to talk a little bit more about a fear that a lot of people have, because we talked about earlier how you would make apparently extensive use of a teacher when learning a language. And so this includes some output, apparently. And one of the fears that I had earlier on, a few years ago, was that at an early stage when you do output, specifically speaking, I thought, maybe this is, for me, it's bad because then I'm going to say, wrong sentences, and I'm going to just learn wrong patterns of speech. And then it's going to become so much harder as I progress in the language to stop saying these things. Do you think this is a valid thing to fear?
Definitely. And again, it has to do with personalities. And I can tell you my experience. I started learning Hebrew at the age of 13. And I was very self-conscious, and because they put me in a Hebrew speaking class, no language teacher. I was trying to pick up the language. And age 13 is not exactly childhood. And for 6 months, I wasn't speaking at all. But I was processing the input, and what I was doing, I was formulating sentences in my head because I was ashamed of speaking with errors. I didn't want that. But I could understand people around me saying, this girl, she doesn't know any Hebrew, she will never speak. And 6 months later, I started speaking almost perfectly, which it was very surprising to people. So some people, and by the way, actually Crush coined the term silent period. And he said that many people process input, they go through kind of silent period, and then they start speaking. So here, I agree that some people need more time before they speak. But if you have a sympathetic teacher, one-on-one, I think the teacher should encourage you to produce output so that they can correct you. Because that was, for me, it was a different situation. I mean, I was there with a bunch of Hebrew-speaking kids and nobody there to teach me. So again, there are individual differences. There is another scholar, Mike Sherwood Smith, who coined the term auto-input. And he was talking about this case where he said that with some people, they listen to the input and they talk in their heads. So they provide more input. Of course, if that input is totally incorrect, it would be better if somebody else corrected you. So again, what you did was fine, what I did was fine. The end product speaks for itself. So, but in a classroom, for example, I would encourage students to speak.
Yes, I just want to go back a little bit on what you said. So you said one of the things that you said was that when you talk to in your own mind in a foreign language, this also counts as input.
Yeah, auto input, right?
Right, auto input. I never really thought of this because this means that then if you're learning a language, and I've had this experience as well, where you talk to yourself in, I don't know, in Japanese or whatever in your mind, then it counts as studying in a sense. Right.
Yes, yeah. Actually, look, it could count as output if you did the same thing with somebody else. If you put it on paper or in a conversation to a person, it is a kind of output.
Right.
Only, so what you're doing when you formulate thought in a foreign language is, I would call it self-auto output.
Yes.
No, all output, auto output, the silent output.
Well, maybe, yeah, we should coin the term. But yeah, this is very interesting. I think about this sometimes, but my opinion on this was just that, well, I'm just talking to myself, so it doesn't really count as studying for sure, but I suppose it does, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
I did.
Right. All right. Cool. Thank you so much. And everyone, if you have questions, put them in the comment section. And I've put all the takeaways from this interview on my website at lewistalgren.com. I'll put the link in the description.
All right, and that's it for today's interview, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. And remember, I have all of the takeaways from this interview at my website at lewistalgren.com, link in the description, and I'll see you in the next video.